The gunshot echoed through the cemetery parking lot at 3:47 p.m. Valentina Torres was still wearing her funeral dress when the bullet found her chest. 4 words that would explain everything. You're next, little sister. The sender? Someone who had been watching from the back row the entire time. 15 minutes earlier, she had been throwing dirt on her brother's coffin. And the killer. The killer had been planning this moment since the day her brother died. Now, she was bleeding out on the same asphalt where she'd parked to say goodbye. But here's what the police didn't know. Valentina had received a text message during the funeral service. What Valentina discovered about her brother's death in those final 15 minutes would cost her everything. Before we dive into this twisted case, I want to thank everyone who's been following these stories. Your support means everything. And if you're new here and love true crime mysteries that will keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button because this case is about to get dark. October 15th, 2023. St. Mary's Cemetery in Phoenix, Arizona. Valentina Torres had buried 3 people in her life. She never thought the 4th would be herself. But Valentina knew something they didn't. Joaquín had been clean for 2 years. He'd gotten his life together, found a good job, was planning to propose to his girlfriend. Her brother, Joaquín, had been found dead in his apartment 6 days earlier. The police called it a drug overdose. Case closed. There were faces in the crowd she didn't recognize. People who claimed to be Joaquín's friends, but she'd never seen them before. One man in particular kept staring at her from the back row. When she tried to get a better look, he'd turn away. As she stood at the graveside, watching the casket lower into the ground, Valentina noticed something strange. What Valentina didn't know was that someone in that crowd had killed her brother, and she was about to figure out who. The phone buzzed during the eulogy. Valentina almost ignored it. She should have. And suddenly, Valentina realized something that made her stomach drop. Joaquín hadn't died from an overdose. He'd been murdered. Instead, she saw a number she recognized immediately. It was Joaquín's phone number, her dead brother's phone number. She glanced down at her screen, expecting condolences from a family friend. Who had her brother's phone? Who knew what he used to call her? You're next, little sister. Valentina's blood ran cold. She looked around the crowd, her heart pounding. She stood up abruptly, mumbling an excuse about needing air. But as she walked toward the parking lot, she heard footsteps behind her. Someone was following her. But this text wasn't from a random number. It was from her brother's phone, her dead brother's phone. And suddenly, Valentina realized something that made her stomach drop. Joaquín hadn't died from an overdose. He'd been murdered. Valentina's hands were shaking as she reached her car. She turned around to see who had followed her, but the cemetery pathways were empty. Whoever had been behind her had vanished. Then she noticed something else, a missed call from Joaquín's number, time-stamped 3 hours after he'd been declared dead. She sat in her car, staring at the text message. Valentina's brother had been hiding something worth killing for. 2 weeks before his death, he'd called her, panicked. He'd said he'd seen something he shouldn't have, something that could destroy someone's life. Unit 247. The key is taped under my kitchen sink. Now, she realized he'd been trying to stay alive. If anything happens to me, he'd said, check my storage unit. Valentina had thought he was being paranoid. And in 15 minutes, Valentina would pay the ultimate price for uncovering the truth. Valentina was about to start her car when she saw him. This was Detective Raymond Wolf, the same detective who had ruled her brother's death an overdose. The same detective who had refused to investigate further when she'd begged him to look deeper. The man from the back row of the funeral was walking toward her, no longer trying to hide. He was tall, wearing a dark suit, and his face was calm. Too calm for someone approaching a grieving sister. She recognized him now. Valentina, he said, tapping on her window. We need to talk. See, Joaquín was asking a lot of questions before he died. Someone who had promised to find justice for her brother. Questions about evidence that went missing from crime scenes. Questions about cases that got buried. Questions about dirty cops. She rolled the window down slightly. About what? About what your brother told you before he died. Your brother was getting too close to something that could destroy a lot of lives, including mine. Valentina's hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. He didn't tell me anything. That's not what I think." Detective Wolf leaned closer to the window. She recognized the voice immediately. It was someone she trusted.
At the time they met, Emilia was dating Jamie Ake, a friend from school and the father of one of her children. Their relationship was complicated. They were constantly breaking up and getting back together. When Joshua and Heather moved to Florida, the two couples became friends. They spent time together, hung out as a group of 4. Everything seemed normal. But then Heather became pregnant with her 3rd child. Instead of becoming a loving father, Joshua relapsed. He became aggressive again. He was angry that Heather, due to her pregnancy, refused intimacy, so he started looking elsewhere. A mutual friend of theirs died in a car accident. Joshua and Emilia were devastated. They needed comfort. They needed someone to understand their pain. They couldn't think of anything better than to sleep together. From that moment, their affair began. Emilia and Jamie were on a break, so he had no idea. The lovers met almost every day. But pregnant Heather had no clue their relationship was more than just friendship. When Heather gave birth, all the childcare fell on her shoulders. Joshua found it far more entertaining to spend time with Emilia than to care for his newborn baby. This affair lasted nearly a year. Can you imagine? For almost a year, Heather was raising their child alone, while her partner was sleeping with someone she considered a friend. When Heather finally discovered the truth, she was devastated. She packed her things, took the children, and returned to Mississippi. That's when Joshua realized what he'd lost. You don't value what you have until it's gone. He realized he needed Heather, not Emilia. Emilia was just a way to satisfy his needs. He was never in love with her. Joshua ended things with Emilia and went to Mississippi to win back Heather. He got down on his knees. He swore he would never look at another woman. He promised he would change. Heather believed him. She always did. They lived in Mississippi for 5 months. Everything was wonderful, until they decided to return to Florida. Moving back to Marion County brought everything back to square one. Joshua almost immediately started drinking and using drugs again. He became aggressive. The arguments started. The cycle resumed. After another breakup, Joshua ran back to Emilia. But this time, Heather didn't just walk away. She wanted him back too. What happened next was unlike anything you've ever heard. All 3 of them entered into a polyamorous relationship. Joshua was living with both women. There were even rumors that Heather and Emilia were involved with each other. But here's the thing about polyamory. It only works when everyone truly consents, when there's no jealousy, when everyone is getting what they need. That wasn't the case here. Both women dreamed of being the only one for Joshua. Neither was satisfied with the arrangement. Both tolerated it out of fear of losing the man they loved. This toxic triangle continued for months. Joshua would leave one woman for the other, then return. It was emotional torture for everyone involved.
When police arrived at 4:15 p.m., they found something that changed everything about this case. Valentina Torres was alive. Barely. The second bullet had grazed her shoulder, and she'd played dead when she hit the ground. As Detective Wolf stood over her, believing she was dead, Valentina had managed to activate the voice recorder on her phone. She'd captured his entire confession. But there was more. When crime scene investigators searched Wolf's car, they found Joaquín's phone. And on that phone were dozens of photos, pictures of evidence bags, documentation of missing money, recordings of conversations between corrupt officers. Joaquín Torres had been building a case against police corruption for months, and he'd been smart enough to hide backup copies in multiple locations. Valentina wasn't the only target. She was just the first. Detective Wolf had a list of 7 people who knew about the corruption ring. 7 people who were supposed to die to keep the secret buried. Detective Raymond Wolf wasn't working alone. The investigation revealed a corruption network that reached the highest levels of the Phoenix Police Department. For 3 years, Wolf and 6 other officers had been stealing drugs from evidence lockers and reselling them on the street. They'd been skimming money from crime scenes. They'd been planting evidence on innocent people and taking bribes from guilty ones. Joaquín Torres, a civilian crime scene photographer, had stumbled onto their operation by accident. He'd noticed that evidence he'd photographed was disappearing from storage. Money he'd documented was never logged. Cases that should have been solved were being closed without investigation. So he'd started his own investigation, and that investigation had gotten him killed. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Joaquín's sister. The arrest happened exactly where Valentina took her last breath. Detective Raymond Wolf was arrested at his home 3 days later. The evidence against him was overwhelming: Joaquín's hidden files, Valentina's recording, and testimony from other officers who agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. But the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. The investigation revealed that the ring had been operating for over a decade. Hundreds of cases had been compromised. Dozens of innocent people had been convicted on planted evidence. Valentina Torres had died trying to expose the truth, but his sister had lived to see it come to light. Even from prison, the killer had one last secret to reveal. In a final interview, Wolf admitted that Joaquín wasn't his first victim. 2 other people who had gotten too close to the corruption ring had died in accidents over the past 5 years. The case that started with the brother's funeral had uncovered the biggest police corruption scandal in Phoenix history. Valentina Torres never got to see justice served, but her 15 minutes of terror exposed a killer who thought they'd gotten away with murder. She survived that day in the cemetery, but she didn't survive the investigation that followed. 3 months later, Valentina was found dead in her apartment. The official cause of death was suicide, but her family believes she was murdered to prevent her from testifying. Detective Raymond Wolf was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. 6 other officers were convicted on corruption charges. The Phoenix Police Department was placed under federal oversight. But the real hero of this story was Joaquín Torres, a crime scene photographer who risked everything to expose the truth. His hidden files led to the conviction of 7 corrupt officers and the reopening of over 200 cases. If cases like this keep you awake at night wondering what evil lurks in ordinary places, you need to subscribe right now. I've got 3 more cases just like this one coming up: murders that happened in plain sight, killers who thought they were untouchable, and victims who fought back from beyond the grave. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and let me know in the comments what would you have done in Valentina's position. Could you have survived those 15 minutes? Next week, we're covering the case of the wedding photographer who captured his own murder on camera. You won't want to miss it. The truth always comes out. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we'd like.